Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
Because I think there's a huge myth out there that anxiety can't be controlled, that it's something you have to live with, it's something you have to manage, because the nature of anxiety is, as you know, is that it's peaks and troughs. So you can be horribly anxious and it will stall your life, and then sort of somehow magically it seems to lessen. And so then people pick up and carry on with their normal lives. And then because they're not thinking about it, they're sort of glad to have escaped it. They never actually do anything about it.
Today, in this ongoing series of specific mental health topic episodes, I'm joined by one of the UK's leading psychologists and specialists in anxiety, Wendy Dignan. Wendy went through her own battles like most people in these fields do, and she built resilience and came out the other side, and now in her day-to-day work she helps others do the same. The world is heavy, it's turbulent out there, we're all feeling the strain, the heaviness as the sensitive people that we need to be creative in our day-to-day work. Wendy is here to have that conversation with me and help you. This is the Creative Condition. How you doing, guys? I hope I find you well and creatively fired up. It's summertime. You hope that we're bouncing around. That's the vision, isn't it? When we're in winter and it's dark nights and you see the rain going under the glow of the streetlights and we feel gloomy and we see big puddles and everything feels a little bit worse. You think of summer and you think of sunshine and lying on the grass and going to festivals and doing whatever you like to do with your summers. And then we get here. And then we're all hot and sweaty and we can't sleep right, so we feel more anxious. At least I do. So that's the briefing for today's show. I came across Wendy Dignan, UK psychologist and specialist in anxiety, recently through a little rough patch of my own. I wanted to hear someone help me understand my cognitive responses to troubling thoughts, to news headlines, to turbulence in the world at large and my industry as AI, turns everything upside down. Something you guys would have heard me preach many times is Stutz, the film about psychotherapist Phil Stutz, based in Los Angeles. It's a film made by Jonah Hill because he wanted to share Phil's methods and tools with other people to help them the way it had helped him. And that film had a profound effect on me, and I loved Phil's teachings that the immovables in life are uncertainty, pain and constant work, and how if you can welcome them into your life and accept they're an inevitable part of it, then things get a little easier because you're responding to them, not lamenting their presence or getting into pity parties. And having been so helped by Stutz, I wanted to keep on developing that, and I wanted to recognise something that Wendy said in the preview there at the top of the show, which was the habit that we fall into is feeling bad with anxiety, and given that anxiety is not something inherent to us, it's not something we carry around in the way that maybe a chronic illness might be within us physiologically. Anxiety is an alarm system. It's a valuable alarm system in the human body. It's just that it gets triggered and activated by thoughts and external factors that we can actually take some control over, that we can manage and respond to in a better way. So as part of that learning, I came across Wendy's podcast and I loved the warmth. I loved the bite-sized episode. It's called Overcoming Anxiety. You'll find it either through Wendy's platform, Fearless Female, which is fearlessfemale.co.uk, or on the usual channels I list on Spotify. And it was wonderful, and I thought, I wonder if Wendy's available for a conversation. So here she is. I'm bringing her off the back of my episode with Emily Hurd about burnout. Emily was a burnout coach. I thought that was a wonderful episode, and I'm piecing together something of a toolkit for you guys at the moment to acknowledge just how tough it can feel out there. How revolutions in our industry can be very challenging. They can force pivots. They can cause certain ends to certain things we once had down as the dream, or maybe we rely on them for our livelihoods. That's very troubling. However, we can respond to all of that in a better way, and Wendy is here today to talk about exactly how we can do that. I would love your feedback. Please do get me that Ben at bentalon.co.uk, or you can message me on LinkedIn. Let's connect through the show. I love it. If you get a chance, please do leave a little review, rating or subscription. It doesn't take very long at all, but it really helps me to continue building this platform through The Creative Condition, which you can visit at thecreativecondition.co.uk. Through that, you can access my coaching platform. We can talk about a program for you, 6 months, 1 year, or just a one-off pit stop, which is an intensive work through of your foundational creativity to get you some direction, some tangible, actionable advice, exercises, and a program moving forward to get you realigned with the magic you might have felt, but might not feel now in all the confusion. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of this show. They've been here since day one, 10 years ago. The show started as a Restful Mimics in 2015. We are now here. It's a part of the broader ecosystem of The Creative Condition, The Creative Condition podcast. And that is the brilliant Illustration X. You can check out their global roster of wonderfully talented illustrators, animators, and everything in between at illustrationx.com. These guys do such great work for our industry, working with the likes of the Association of Illustrators, the Society of Artists Agents, and much more. That is enough from me for the moment. If you want to check out Wendy's awesome work, you can do that at Wendy Dignan, that's dignan.co.uk. You'll find the ability there to book a consultation, the FAQs, the blog, and you can also check out, like I mentioned, a fearlessfemale.co.uk platform, which is gorgeous. It's helping women to deal with their worries and their anxious feelings in their lives through a community-based platform, which is beautiful. So there you have it. That's it. Let's get into the conversation with the brilliant Wendy Dignan.
It's part of our makeup. It's our evolutionary process that keeps us safe. Anxiety is just the point where it becomes a little bit hypersensitive, that protective factor. And so everything becomes a problem and sends you into that fight, flight or freeze mode. And that's basically what anxiety is. It's a great thing. It stops us stepping out in front of cars. It keeps us safe from the world. But actually, when it's blighting your day and you can't, walk to the shop and get a coffee, then it's a problem.
I never really considered myself to have anxiety in the past in that sense. And I don't know what my assumption of what it was. But I'm thinking now back to my 20s. And I look back and I realise it's always been there, but very quietly. I always say I'm a bit of a worrier. I would always allow my brain to take over, let's say in relationships, and met a new girl and they hadn't texted me back for 3 hours. And then that part of my brain kicks in and starts, spinning these doom scenarios. And I look back now and realise that it was anxiety. I never knew how to term that. I just put myself down as a worrier. But in terms of anxiety, so it's absolutely something that we all have. It's a fundamental survival mechanism of the human condition. What traits in an individual make some people more susceptible to it than others? Would I be right in saying that high sensitivity plays a part in this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's typically someone who's a thinker. Usually more introverted than extroverted, because the psychological difference is that an introvert is not necessarily someone that's not confident. You can be a confident introvert and people would say, what? You can't be an introvert. What's that all about? An introvert is someone who gives it a good dose of thinking about. So it's someone who'll take time to absorb lots of information and think about it and decide what they think about those thoughts. Whereas an extrovert, it's just out there. They do the thinking externally. So that's really how you'd pick it up. And of course, there's all the nature-nurture debate. As a behaviourist, I think that we learn how to react to things. You've got how you deal with the world. So whether you think about things or you do things first and ask second, as an extrovert would do, And you've also got the input about core beliefs. So core beliefs are the things that we absorb from our upbringing, and those are usually from a significant caregiver, parents, or whoever you're around a lot of time. And that's about core beliefs about how you think other people are, how you think the world is, and how you think you are within the world. And it's usually I am statements. So I am often typically as Brits, we're quite negatively focused. So, for example, if you look at the difference between um, my American clients and my British clients, the British always come from a position of not being good enough and not enough in some way, whereas American clients often grow up in, and obviously a huge generalization, but they often grow up in an environment where if little Johnny comes last in the race, he's still a winner. And the British as a cultural norm aren't great at doing that. So the Americans often have much better self-esteem, and the world is and therefore the world is a safer place. Whereas as us Brits, the world is not so safe because it's be careful, don't run or you'll fall over and break your neck. That's
Hmm.
often something you hear as a kid, and that's what builds your ideas that the world is not safe. And so you put that together with someone who thinks about things, and that's what creates anxiety.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Something quite tribal about that. And I see it often within family dynamics. I'll see kind of intergenerational behaviors passed down, because you absorbed, as you said, those chief caregivers, those behaviors, those role models in our lives. Whether that's good or bad, we tend to see their way of doing life as something that we pick up on. And I think that happens on an unconscious level too.
Yeah, absolutely. Children are like little sponges. They absorb everything that goes on in their environment, whether we like it or not. And one thing that research never seems to answer for us is what we allow through the filter and what we choose to discard. And one of the great sources of that is when they do twin studies. So you can sort of take out the genetic element. And if twins have sadly been through a real trauma, it's amazing how one will be totally traumatized by it and the other's able to totally deflect it.
Hmm.
And we still don't know why. It's just what's allowed through the perceptual filter. And that's the thing, it's not, a lot of people expect sort of mental health stuff like anxiety and low mood and all sorts of other stuff to come on the back of trauma, and that's not the case. Obviously trauma is trauma, and that causes its own problems, but something like anxiety is not caused by trauma. It's a build-up. So as you were saying that you would describe yourself as a worrier, I think that you've practiced that as a coping mechanism. And yes, anxiety peaks if life sends you a bit of a curveball, but other than that, you practice an anxious coping strategy. And the problem is that when life sends you a curveball, we cope by doing more of our coping strategy, which, if it causes anxiety, is going to cause more anxiety. And so we do more to help us cope. And therefore, we become hugely anxious and end up through my door. And that's how it happens. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism that is there to biologically keep us safe, but we build it, and when we get stress and things that come into our world, we roll that coping mechanism out more strongly.
Yes, that's really interesting. And I've been quite shocked since, so I had mentioned this to you when we talked, but as a new parent, I found myself more tired, more vulnerable than I had been in the past because by simple virtue that I was working on less computing power. There was, I've interviewed a number of psychologists now for this show, and every one of them has echoed the sentiment that there's only so much they can do for a client if they're not getting the right amount of sleep, the right nutrition.
Yeah.
Those are the building blocks of a healthy functioning brain that enables us the clarity and the control to work on those thoughts that come from an anxious standpoint. And one thing that since I've begun to do the groundwork of understanding my cognitive function and what's happening in my brain when I feel anxious, when I feel overwhelmed, I've been completely shocked at just how quickly that can transform when you take control of it. And it's really not easy, but actually there have been tools that I've used that I've learned along the way where in the morning I feel like I might need the help of someone like yourself who just someone else to help drag me out of my own head. And then in a matter of an hour or so, by practicing these tools and really grabbing hold of them, I've been shocked to find that come the afternoon, I feel brilliant. And actually, it's given me great heart that no matter how bad it feels in the moment, that I do have a degree of control over this. So I suppose in terms of a question, what leads a person to being in a kind of perpetual state of anxiety, as in they walk around feeling fearful and on edge all of the time? What are the common traits that you see among your clients, for example, that lead them to that place?
I think the main thing, one of the first things you touched on it there, one of the first things that I do with a client is I I I sell it to them. It sounds bad, but I have to sell them that there are things out there that will help. I have to get them to sign up. Emotionally speaking, that if I do these things and we work at them together, it's not do this, go away and come back.
Hmm.
It's always a team effort. I'll talk about things that I think are really going to help. We'll practice them here, and I want you to practice them yourself. But before they do any of that stuff, they have to sign on the dotted line that there is a little bit of hope. And I think that's where my story and my background, being horribly anxious, comes into play, because it's one of the things that I wheel out and talk about how anxious I was. And, I can go on the telly, I can do podcasts, I can do all the stuff that would have been horrific for me, when I couldn't even come out of the house. And it's the buy-in, and really the buy-in is about hope. And that latches onto that control thing, because if you've got hope of overcoming this, you're latching onto that little seed of maybe I can do it. Maybe I have got it in me. Maybe I will be good enough. And that's all it needs to start the process. And then I say, don't worry about the tools. That's my job. Let me do my job. We'll find out what's going to work in the best and easiest, fastest way for you. And we'll practice that. But
Hmm.
it's that hope, it's that buy-in, it's that maybe there is a way of controlling this thing. Because I think there's a huge myth out there that anxiety can't be controlled, that it's something you have to live with, it's something you have to manage. Because the nature of anxiety is, as you know, is that it's peaks and troughs. So you can be horribly anxious and it will stall your life. And then sort of somehow magically it seems to lessen. And so then people pick up and carry on with their normal lives. And then because they're not thinking about it, they're sort of glad to have escaped it. They never actually do anything about it. And I know that anxiety waits for you. It's just waiting to tap you on the shoulder. It could be round the corner or it could be years away, but it will be back because you're still
Mm.
doing the same things in the same way.
And from experience, I've recognized the role of the sheer fatigue that comes on the other side of carrying anxiety is exhausting. And I have to believe that that is a part of the reason why people find themselves in a perpetual state of it, because it's a self-fulfilling cycle, isn't it? Where, someone will, I mean, tell us about that. Tell us about the sheer energy demands physiologically of anxiety.
Yeah. Anxiety is totally debilitating, and it is a loop. You get stuck in that horrible loop. And again, that's sort of back to my first job. You were talking about you can't do anything unless you've got the energy to do it. And it's the same. It's the same with any sort of mental health thing, but particularly with anxiety, because it's so exhausting. It's like running marathons in your mind day after day after day, because you're trying to function and trying to use the brain space that functioning gives you, just to get up, go to work, do what you've got to do, driving stuff. But you're also in a constant fear state, and trying to battle that fear state, because your brain is taking away any sort of logical thought. It's trying to get you to focus on the fear because it's sort of preparing you to die. And so that anxious voice is like, no, no, listen to me. You can't go about your day-to-day life. We need to prepare here. And that battle, I often say it's like a good guy and bad guy slugging it out, sitting on either shoulder. It's really, really hard because all it wants to do is get you to focus inward. And of course, the minute you focus inwards, you feel the physical symptoms of anxiety, and then you get anxiety and panic attacks, and it stops you, which is of course what anxiety wants you to do. It wants you to absolutely stop. But that battle is totally and utterly debilitating. And that's where you have to be at a point where you've got enough energy reserves, because I know when you're ready to sort of go toe to toe with anxiety, you've got to have just that little space, that little gap in the tank to give. And sometimes that's about medication. So, medication is not cure all. You've got to do the work. The way I think about medication is we need to get somebody some space. So if meds are going to help you get through the things that you can't sideline and can't stop doing, it buys you that space. And that space is where we do the work. Because you can't rely on meds forever. You've got to do the work, because then you believe it's the
Hmm.
meds that are making you better. And that's not the right headspace for someone who runs anxiety. It's about feeling out of control. It's about the meds controlling your state of mind rather than you. So it's such a fine line between balancing it. But you've got to find a way to get enough space past the exhaustion to be able to do the stuff.
And that makes me think of, so one thing that really helped me was coming across the film Stutz. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about
I've
it's
not seen
about
it.
it's made by Jonah Hill, and his psychotherapist Phil Stutz had transformed his life for the better, and he acknowledged that as a Hollywood actor, he was able to afford Phil's services, which were kind of high end in LA, and so he wanted to make this film to share the tools that Phil, or some of the tools that Phil used to help other people. And one of the things that Phil talks about the importance of is acknowledging the inescapables in life, which he terms as pain, uncertainty, and constant work. And it's once you acknowledge and welcome those into your life and realize that actually, all of what you just explained to us it does require constant effort moving forward. I think there's something quite liberating about that. I certainly found it to be so. You stop kind of running away from a day-to-day trivial problem, or maybe, in my case, I'm a freelance illustrator and writer. So, it's constant. I have to always be responsible for bringing in my own work all of the time, week to week. And there'll be times when I feel fatigued by that and think, I just need that one big project to come in. But then there's that ideal that isn't real. It's, life isn't like that. There will always be the next week and the next month. And I think that there is peace to be found in that. And I think that does relate to what you're saying there about not being entirely reliant upon the medication, because it takes an understanding of what we are and our cognitive function and our energy levels and all of those things to be able to work with them and manage them. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. It, you know, it, there's got to be an acceptance that this is where you are, and it is about work, and it is about a bit of struggle, because there is pain in life. Life sends curveballs your way, and you have to find a better way to cope with that. And it is very much about accepting that that's who we are. And part of that control stuff is often people who are predisposed to anxiety sort of hide from things. They try and step it. They'll kick it in the long grass rather than saying, "Okay, come on, bring it on." And that's the difference. And you actually see that. If people have to be very self-motivated, if you're running your own business and doing your own thing, you've got to get up every morning and rely on yourself. You might have a team, but it's down to you. And that's about control. And it's I always find it fascinating that there's a lot of people who have their own businesses or have to be self-motivated in some way, who suffer from anxiety. And I think they just get to the point of overwhelm that they almost feel that weight of responsibility and start to feel a little bit out of control of things. And although they've got that in them, you just need to sort of get back in the driving seat and sort of get back in your own body and be more you. It's often something that I say to people. You've got to get back to being more you rather than trying to hide from you and escape all the stuff that comes at you. But it's incredibly difficult, and it often it comes down to that word of control. and
Hmm.
how what that means, because it's such a it's a badly used word these days. It's almost like a dirty word, isn't it? Control, like control freak and controlling, and it's used in a very negative context. But anxiety is about control. It's about feeling out of control and how to get back in control.
Yeah, that's right. And there's I like to frame it. I find it useful to frame it as authorship almost. Like
Yeah,
and this is when I work because I do creativity coaching. I something I always recognize as someone who has had periods of overwhelm because I'm very hungry for what I do. I love it. It's my passion. Therefore, I tend to overload myself. I have the opposite problem to people who maybe can't get started. It's I don't know when
yeah,
to stop, and therefore I end up in these periods as a twin parent, as someone who's managing several aspects of a business. It just sometimes it all just caves in on me, and I think, what are you even thinking? You need to be a bit kinder to yourself, strip things down to manageable workloads. So I came across this lovely term from Japanese philosophy when I was researching one of my podcast guests called Seikatsu Shan. It loosely translates to those who live by doing, or the author of your own life. And I found that as a concept to be really powerful and a nice kind of warmer counter to the control thing because
yeah,
it's essentially the same thing,
yes,
except I love that framework. Maybe it's because I'm a writer and I'm a big book fan, but I liked that idea of stepping away from myself, viewing myself in the third person, and almost giving myself permission to take control, really, to be the author of my own life, and to say, okay, you've got yourself in a situation of overwhelm. you know, there's no point of sitting here and completely freaking out about it. Start making tiny steps to listing things, to structure, to restructuring, whatever you need to do to make this less intimidating for yourself. That's the way to go. And I look at my broader life in that regard now, and I just find something very empowering about considering myself the author of my own life, and it's taking the reins again.
that's lovely. That's a lovely way to see it. I'm going to steal that for my practice.
Mm, do it.
It is. It's a lovely way to sort of get people to sort of understand how that is and how they can make it work for them.
Yeah, and let's try to strip it down into kind of saying that I do an exercise called the chapters, whereas, because I'm a social person and since being a new parent, I find it hard to give the time I would like to give to all of the people in my world. But on the same basis, I look at it as kind of, okay, these, you get amazing books where a character who maybe appears once somewhere early on and once somewhere a bit later in the story plays an equally profound role in that story as someone who's in it constantly. So I look at friends who, I try to draw excitement from when I might see that person again down the line, or not knowing whether I'll see that person again. It's just, again, it's finding ways for you as an individual that you can structure your own life. And I think we all could do a better job of acknowledging our personality and making decisions in accordance to that. Do you find that within anxiety and the people you work with that do you ever see a pattern of disconnect from their truer self? Because I think that we're all striving for this kind of idea of authenticity and understanding ourselves. But when people say just be yourself, what does that even mean unless you've done the work and made peace with who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. There's still this stigma about therapy, and very few people have an understanding. If you ask them that question, it used to be like an interview question, probably back in the 90s. Describe yourself in 3 words. People have got no clue. And obviously, I don't ask clients that, but they don't know what they're about. They don't know what their core belief systems are. They don't know enough about themselves. I think we're so swayed by how we should be rather than how we are. It's like everybody has parts of themselves that they feel are unacceptable. Why? Why do you feel the need to be a certain way? And it's the not knowing. And that's why I'll often use that be more you.
Hmm.
Don't try and be less you, because that's often people's coping mechanism, which opens the door wide open to anxiety. And that's about trying to not be themselves, be less of themselves, because they think it's a problem. They think it's fundamentally the thing that causes anxiety, or maybe if it's a social anxiety, why people don't like them. And it's that shrinking away from the world that creates more anxiety rather than less. And it is
Yeah.
knowing who they are and what they're about, and accepting that, warts and all, because we're not talking about really undesirable personality traits. We're just talking about things that they feel are not very desirable. for whatever reason, wherever they pluck these from. And when you ask them the questions about, where is that written? Show me where that is. Where have you found this information? They just pull it from things they've watched, things they've read, sort of the influx of social media and the constant scrolling, whatever sites they follow, they feel the need to be a certain way. And so they become less that.
Mm.
When actually I think people should be more themselves. But of course, as you said, they have to understand what that is, first of all.
And it's recognizing the duality of any given personality trait, and also the fact that someone recently said to me there are no good and bad emotions. It is contextual.
Yeah,
It depends where they emerge, what you do with them, how you manage them.
absolutely. Yeah, emotions are a great thing. And again, something that's become a bit unfashionable. It's sort of a dumbing down of how you feel. It's almost something that I know in my private practice, I worry about saying that. I mean, it's a bit trite, isn't it? A psychologist asking someone how they feel, but it's just not the right question to ask anymore. And so you find different ways of eliciting that response from people, because if you hit somebody with a feelings question that is in a very cognitive mindset, they look at you like a rabbit in the headlights. It frightens them. Oh, you want me to talk about feelings? I didn't know we were up for this today.
Yeah,
So it's
that's fair.
it's a it's a tricky thing.
It really is, yeah. I feel like we skirted over it, but I'd love to. Would you mind sharing a bit about your background, because your story sounds really interesting, and I think kind of human case studies almost in this, in the context of anxiety, are very interesting and empowering, and help people to be more at peace with theirs. So if you'd be happy to share your
Sure.
sort of origin story, I'd love that.
So when I was, I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as an anxious child. I was very confident, very sort of outgoing, very sociable. And I was doing A levels at the time and working part time in a vets. And I realised this particular day, as the day was going on, I'm a very smiley person, and naturally I'm smiling at all the people coming in, and my face sort of felt a bit numb. And the vet actually turned around and said, I think you need to go to like the A&E room. And, it was like disaster stations. And I managed to get an emergency appointment with a GP who said, you've got something called Bell's palsy. And this was in the context of I was, functioning really well, didn't feel anxious at all, was out and about doing 18-year-old things, having a great time. So it wasn't something that I was aware that was creeping up. Literally, suddenly the Bell's palsy dropped out of nowhere. So Bell's palsy, it looks like you've had a stroke. The left hand side of my face was paralyzed, so I couldn't close my left eye. I couldn't move. I couldn't smile with that side of my face. It was literally paralyzed. And I was lucky enough to get to see a GP who had just read some research about Bell's palsy, and said that it's often a stress trigger, and wasn't feeling stressed in the slightest. Um, and she said, "Why don't you go off and see I know a great psychologist?" And that sort of opened the door to CBT and understanding how fearfully I viewed the world. And of course, at that point, at 18, you're finding out who you are, what you're about, what you like. And, it was a big wide world. And I had no idea what I wanted to do, and was feeling less than in a big way, but not in an obvious way, because I was out there confident, chatty, nothing that I noticed myself, nobody would ever notice about me. But of course, subtly, and that's the thing, I say it sort of grows in dark corners, those anxious thoughts, and they were building up. And so I think probably the work I did with a psychologist identified those thoughts that were growing, and funnily enough, I always mention I was at the vets because that was one of the things, and it was, I'd really like to be a vet, but I'm not sure I'm clever enough. I'm just not very good at science. I'm not very good at maths. Um, and a story that I often tell to clients now is that I must be the only person who failed my maths O level 5 times, but managed to do statistics at doctorate level. but it was just that, that fear of, oh, I must be innumerate, I just can't do this thing. And that was all the stuff that was growing. So that's how anxiety came into my life, because the Bell's palsy was the obvious symptom and the obvious connection. And I was lucky enough to do the CBT, and I got full function back in my face. And really that's where my niche became health psychology, and that's the brain body connection. So physical symptoms, and of course, anxiety can be so physical. It's the panic attacks, it's the feelings. So, all the middle-aged men who turn up at the GP saying, "I think I've had a heart attack," when they've had a panic attack, because that's how it feels. And people who've had panic attacks, it feels like you're dying.
Hmm.
um Anxiety is such a physical thing. It's the palpitations, it's the hot and cold sweats, it's the migraines, it's
Yeah.
the way your brain is saying stop now. And so I became fascinated with that connection because of the Bell's palsy, thinking, well, hang on, I didn't seem anxious at all. I wasn't an anxious child. I wouldn't have described myself as an anxious teenager, but the thoughts in there were building. And of course, I was doing a very good job of suppressing those things. And so my brain was like, right, okay, we're going to keep building the stress and building the stress, and then we're going to do this. Now, will you listen? Because at 18, looking like you'd had a stroke was disastrous. And
Yeah.
I often say that when you get a physical symptom of anxiety, it's always going to be the worst one for you, because your brain has to bring out the big guns and say, okay, what's going to stop you in your tracks? And if you keep on going and keep on going, I'm just going to pull your batteries out. And so when people talk about a nervous breakdown, they've ignored the physical symptoms to the point where you just can't get up in the morning. One morning, you open your eyes and you just can't function. A bit like when you've got too many tabs open on your laptop and it just freezes, and you've got to pull the plug out, take the battery out the back, whatever it takes to reset it. And that's what the brain does. And so you get physical symptoms first. And so
Yeah.
I'm very, very somatic. I feel things. So I know if I've got a bit of a headache, I might just have a bit of a headache, but usually it's because I'm feeling a little bit overloaded. And so I now know that I have to be sensitive to that. That's a bit of a sign, and I'm not going to ignore it anymore. And that was my big thing. With the help of CBT, I learned how to control the stuff, how to challenge the thoughts and change the behavior. And that was huge. Literally, it taught me how to take back control and how to be more me, that I was always going to be enough. And those were the big learning points for me. But now, although I don't feel anxious, I can feel stressed like anybody, but anxiety, it's not a thing. There's two ways that I maintain that. And that's if I get a physical symptom, I know it's a warning sign, and it can be the slightest little thing, and I'll do something about it at an early point. It's like an early warning system. And the other thing is that I keep my comfort zone really wide, because my anxious behavior is to shrink. It's easy for me to shrink. I sit in a room with a person, and that's great. It's really comfortable for me. And it's all about them. There's nothing about me. And so I make myself do things where I have to stand up and speak. Hate public speaking with a passion. But once I get into it, I'm like, I think I quite like this. But it's the thought of doing it. So I'll do the TV thing. I'll do things that are really uncomfortable, because I know it pushes that comfort zone really, really wide. And then I'm all right for a bit. But then when I feel it shrinking, I think, okay, what am I going to do that I really, really hate? And I
Yeah.
know that's what I've got to do.
Yeah, that's very, I like that approach. And in terms of those physiological symptoms, I find that, is it common that so in my case, what will happen is let's say I see a heavy headline about the climate crisis. It's one of my particular Achilles heels in terms of getting myself worked up. I'll see that and I'll enter the fight, flight, freeze instinct, so the adrenaline starts going. You get into that fear response, which is immediately energy draining. But what I didn't acknowledge for the longest time or recognize was that from that point on, my brain has a way of pulling in like iron filings onto a magnet all of the other things in my life, anything then feels overwhelming. So it could be washing up a bowl in the kitchen, it could be messaging a friend. Then everything just, I can't, any way I turn, there's something, whether it's a trivial problem, whether it's something like that, which is worth some concern. The difference maker was recognizing that, yes, while that is a major concern, and yes, while my anxiety is there to warn me of that, my anxiety is also sending me into such an exaggerated version of what I've seen. It's almost caricaturing it to the point where it incapacitates me. That was the intersection I had to do some work at to regain some control again, to go, okay, I need some mechanisms in place here. I need some habits where I can know what's happened physiologically, but apprehend myself before the iron filings start hitting the magnet. Is that something you relate to that is common?
Absolutely. What you're talking about is um, prime time for a CBT intervention, but that is such a common thing because the process that you go through, and people do it slightly differently, but they'll pull in everything from their environment. And I often think it's the brain's way of making sense of anxiety because you don't want to feel like you're losing the plot, but your brain is then in anxious mode and it wants to validate that the world is unsafe. So it will filter through, like you say, something really random. You go to do the washing up and the water's too hot. No, you probably scalded yourself and everything's overly dramatic. It is sometimes when people are in my practice and or on a Zoom meeting, and the things they say, because it's after the fact, they'll laugh themselves and say, I can't believe I was being so dramatic about that, like, all of a sudden everything was a problem. They get into that mindset and they draw in all the tiniest pieces of evidence because your brain is on a constant hunt for evidence to back up why you're anxious, why people are frightening, and why the world is a frightening place. And so once you're in that zone, that's, as you say, it is like iron filings on a magnet. Everything is coming through the filter because you've lost that ability to go, no, no, that's fine. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And, the filter is down and you're at a vulnerable point and everything is in there.
Yeah.
And how that fits really nicely with a CBT intervention is you're talking about how you were able to intervene at that point. So at that point when your filter is, your force field is down and everything's coming at you, everything's suddenly a problem. Um, Using CBT, you can go in there and say, okay, I know this is where anxiety really starts to get hold of me. So what are my thoughts at that point? And your thoughts at that point are that everything is an issue. So then it's about challenging that. How do you normalize that? And it's picking those thoughts up and saying, is that really a problem? What evidence have you for it? And what evidence have you got against it? And then also looking at the behavior that you do. What does that make you do? Do you get on your phone and cancel appointments, or do you sort of think, I have to stay still and rest? What is it that makes the anxiety worse? And let's do something different in terms of behavior. So
Yeah.
it's brilliant to identify the point at which anxiety really gets a hold of you, because then we can do something about the typical thoughts you have at that point and the typical behavior you have at that point. And almost it doesn't matter how you think differently or actually what you do behaviorally different. It just matters that you make a change because it's twofold. It will interrupt the anxiety, but it also gives you a mechanism of control because you're able to stop the process progressing. So it's content
Yes.
and process. You're like, no, whoa, I'm doing that thing again. Let's do it differently.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a couple of, so a big thing that I use all the time. It's another one that I picked up from Stutz, and I'm sure this is used by a lot of people doing similar work. But he calls it the grateful flow, and it's the sense of interrupting the negative thought spiral with something more nourishing. So the idea is close your eyes, work hard to immerse yourself in 5 things you're grateful for. The idea being that by the 5th one, you've kicked your thoughts on a better path. And that was quite I couldn't believe how well that worked the first couple of times I tried it. And it depends again how jaded I am, how vulnerable I am to how well it works. But if I really work for it, it does work. And it's incredible to sort of close your eyes and actually feel a physiological change within your body in terms of when feeling nervous to actually feeling a little more hopeful and humorous and and happy about who you are and where you are and what's going on. And that doesn't, and each time I emerge from an anxious spell, I find that not all that much has changed, which kind of highlights the power of thought and the way that our brains run away with us. And don't get me wrong, climate change hasn't got any better, but it probably hasn't leapt to the Armageddon scenario that my brain likes to play out either. So it's like, okay, let's find some balance in here.
Yeah, and yeah, that's such a great example because you're saying that once you can calm your systems down and you found the right intervention for you, different things work for different people. Once you've found something that works, you can sort of um, get back in your own body and everything calms down and you feel that. So it gives you the hope because it gives you the control. And then you realize where your thought processes are going to, and you can remember that. You can build on that for next time. And so you've got interventions going on all over the place there. And it's a great thing to sort of get power back in your body.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, yeah, it's still bad. The climate crisis is still bad, but it's not where my brain had it a few minutes ago.
And what I find is, and it's something I look at with each of my own creativity coaching clients, is I call it the insurmountables, because everybody's got something to a degree that they feel like it is insurmountable. So that's my version of it. I had a client recently who was very justifiably alarmed by the apparent rise in misogyny. So the Donald Trumps of the world, the Andrew Tates, and she felt very alarmed and sort of despondent around that. So I helped her to reframe that issue and bring that in as a part of her fight as a visual communicator, as a graphic designer, and starting to make work around her feelings relating to that issue. And even though it didn't resolve the matter, it did bring her to a more positive angle on the topic so that she could contribute to a solution in that. And in my case, my work, I chose creativity as my cause because what I was doing was saddling myself with the weight of the world. In these states of panic and anger and these negative emotions that were being used negatively, I would feel the need to be on a march, to sign a petition, to donate to that charity, to I'm one person. I've got young kids. I can't do all of that. But what I recognized was that actually this cause that was important to me, creativity, actually has a major role to play in resolving any of our collective issues. So therefore, if I can commit myself to this one cause within my work, that's manageable. I can do that. And I can then feel like I'm taking a direct action against the insurmountable. And at the same time, I can work on my thought processes, like you mentioned there, find my way of bringing myself back to a place of balance. So they were sort of two actions that I took that have helped me, and I turn to now when I get alarmed about that. You must work around similar insurmountables with your own clients. What does that tend to look like?
Funnily enough, I'm responding to an email from somebody who's asked me about health anxiety and about how to deal with health anxiety when they're actually not well and going through cancer treatment. And that's, it's an unsurmountable. The thing with anxiety and how CBT often treats it is you work on something that's a forecast. Anxiety is often about the what ifs, the fear of the future. What if this happens? What if that happens? And so, that's, as a psychologist, that's often low hanging fruit when it's something that's, unreasonable. It's an unreasonable fear. But actually, when it's a very reasonable fear, it becomes really difficult. And health anxiety, when you're actually not well, is one of those things. And so it's working with a framework where you have to acknowledge things and control the things you control to stop the anxiety getting in the way. Because, of course, the other thing, particularly going through cancer treatment, is about moderating stress. Because cancer treatments work are so much more effective when you haven't got stress in the mix. So there's so many layers of things going on, and of course you can't rely on the premise that this anxious thought is it's over there.
Mhm.
This is actually real and it's happening. And how do you get this person through health anxiety that was around before the condition started? And that's tricky, and that's about um, encouraging them to be more them and build on the resources that they already have.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of acceptance that goes on. It goes back to what we talked about earlier on about how you start with a client. You start with somebody, how much energy have they got to do this work? Where, you meet them where they are,
Yeah.
and how are they, and find out where that is. And then you find out what they've got. Everybody's got what I call a superpower. Anxiety is a superpower because you can make it work for you rather than against you. How are they running anxiety, and how can we make that work for them at this time? Because you can't go in there and take out an unreasonable fear because it's absolutely reasonable.
Yeah.
And that's very tricky work. And it's really about fine-tuning people's resilience. That's a big thing, and accepting where they are, trying to rather than trying to run from it. It's like people who suffer with chronic pain, rather than trying to run away from it. In your mind, you sort of have to accept it and welcome it in. And it is the best way to overcome chronic pain. In our
Yeah.
minds, you try to sort of avoid it and move it out of the way. And, oh, it's here again. And the fear and the dread of it coming back in. And then there's behaviors that back up with things like migraines and chronic pain, like I don't want to book in to do things because I might not feel up to it. And so pain just controls their whole world and their whole well-being. And it's a similar sort of thing. It's how do you do that when that thing is real?
Yeah, and what you said there about ill people, yeah, stress is so demanding on the body, isn't it? That whether it's cancer or fighting any other physical ailment, how can
Mm.
your body be allowed to effectively do that when it's so busy managing all that stress and anxiety because that's so
Yeah.
taxing.
Yeah. It's really it's very delicate, finely tuned work.
Yeah,
But yeah, there are lots of things you can do. It's finding out what your particular superpowers are and using them because they're
yeah,
already in there. Everybody's got things that are particular to them, and it's finding out what you do and how you do it,
yes,
and building on those.
that's it, and that goes back to that understanding and acceptance of self and
Yes.
self-awareness, isn't it, too?
Yeah.
And something I've noticed as I've become more interested in this and working on it more is the kind of importance of one foot in front of the other. This, that
Yeah.
you said it yourself on your podcast. I was listening to that, and I love this. The idea that what are the three things that you must get done today, and kind of, can you drop everything else because you're in a moment where you need to take care, you need to wrestle yourself back to a point of being able to control your thoughts. But if you're completely bombarded and overwhelmed with a million things, then you're not going to do that. And whether it's the grateful flow and the momentum of that, what moving in a straight line, or that technique, what three things can be done today, how important is that? Is simply putting one foot in front of the other until you can bring yourself back to a physiological balance, first of all, and to then get control.
Hugely important because um, people look at the bigger picture. So when you're struggling with whatever it is, people look at the bigger picture of, this thing's getting on top of me. I'm overwhelmed with it. I'm just not functioning. This is awful. And they get totally stuck. There's no movement, nothing at all going on. They just sort of sink into it. And so that one foot in front of the other. And I often say, listen, if you just manage to get out of bed and put your feet flat on the floor, it's like a grounding thing. Feel the floor through the bottom of your feet. That's a win. It's the smallest win. That's all you're going for. And people think in big terms of I've got to get up, get in the car and go to work. That's a win. It's not a win when you're overwhelmed with something. The win is literally feet on the floor. And because once you break it down into the really tiny steps, the tiniest of tiny steps, and you've done one of those, you've won. And you can build on that, or you can say, done my win for today. I'm going to give into this thing, or I'm going to take some time out from the world, whatever it is. But if you've got a win on the card, then that's all you need. And often, so if people struggle with doing things, so functioning, they want to go to the gym, but they just have been unable to. They've had a panic attack, and the gym's an awful scary place for them. um I will celebrate with them if they can just drive in the car park and decide, That's their win for today. They're coming, they're going home. They don't. The win is not about going in the gym. It's about the motivation to do the tiniest thing more than they thought they could do. That's where the win is.
Yeah.
Don't think bigger picture. Think really, really tiny things.
Yeah, because that bigger picture is again that the weight of all that is nuts sometimes,
Yes, yeah. It's too much, and that's where people think the wins are in the big stuff, in the functioning
Yeah.
stuff, and a win is the tiniest of tiny steps that you didn't think you could do.
Yeah, in my industry specifically at the moment, as visual communicators and artists, there's this massive fear over AI and what that's going to mean. And I think that I see so many people worrying about what that's going to mean and what it's going to be. The truth is, none of us know. It's so new and so profound at the moment that, yes, it's going to bring big change. But the only way to effectively deal with that change and manage the stress that that might bring is exactly what you've just said, is to start somewhere small. Okay, maybe you need to move in a slightly different direction, but you can still only do that one tiny step at a time. So you have to find the baseline of optimism with which to approach that, as opposed to sitting there in a fearful state.
Yeah, and it is sometimes about physical movement. It sort of jogs the brain into action. But the thing you were talking there about AI, which must be a huge thing in your industry, it's about one of the things that I think all anxious people suffer with, and that's tolerance of uncertainty.
Yes.
Because, as you say about AI, we don't know. We don't know where the world's going to. It's we're living in a time of huge change in so many different ways, and it's very uncertain for a lot of people, and that's what causes all the aggression and all the stuff that's going on at the moment. It's fear. It's fear of
Mhm.
uncertainty, and as humans, we're not great at tolerating uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that's a big theme when you've got a direct pressure like the stress of how AI is going to change the industries. And it's how to tolerate uncertainty. So if it's directed at a specific thing, it's about practicing that in the rest of your life, about tolerating uncertainty. And I'll talk about it as people who are intolerant of uncertainty will make things either black or white, either positive or negative. And sometimes they don't even care which way it goes, as long as they have that control of, well, I've got a decision here, I can work from that. But it's about learning to sit in the middle, to live in the grey, to sort of shrug your shoulders and say, well, I don't know, I'm just going to carry on.
Hmm.
And that's where stress comes in when they want it to be either one way or the other. They don't care which way it is, they just need to know.
Yeah.
And it's tolerating uncertainty, sitting in the middle.
It is, yeah, and I'm being prepared to look for the opportunity in something that on the surface is a bit shit.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly that. Yeah, yeah,
and don't get me wrong, I'm not, that's again, we live in a world where it's always been a little black and white, like you said about this role of uncertainty, but massively exacerbated by the sheer ubiquity of news cycles and technology. And it's a kind of area that I like to work with my coaching clients with, termed as digital nutrition. It's given that we are all so exposed to so much digital content on a day-to-day basis, you have to take some control over what that's doing to you on a happiness level and on an anxiety level, because if you sit there scrolling every mainstream news channel every day, you probably are going to feel a lot more anxious than if you manage that and curate that in a way that syncs with who you are and how much you can tolerate and should tolerate. Because, you know, um, I remember a specific instance when I was researching a book cover design that I was working on, and it was set in Los Angeles, and the author wanted me to look at the Los Angeles homeless aspect as part of the visual iconography on this artwork. And some of the images were quite harrowing. The sheer amount of homelessness going on and the severity of it was very troubling. And it started to tip me into that anxious headspace. And then the next image on the Google search was from a positive news article about an initiative that was helping to do some good work around that issue. They'd built all these little wooden houses that housed one person temporarily on the beachfronts, and it would give them a place of privacy, a place to get back on their feet for a few days, and it was a roller coaster. My mood sort of went down and then immediately hauled back up. And it was a nice reminder that actually I can take some control over the content that I'm exposing myself to here. And then last Christmas, my wife subscribed me to a month's worth of Positive News magazine, which is absolutely wonderful. You know, it's not head in the sand. It's kind of it's looking at work being done around some of these insurmountable issues, and it's really quite nourishing. And is this something you notice in your clients, particularly now in this digital era, their exposure to news and the likes?
Oh, it's huge because the algorithm on sort of social media works a bit like those iron filings on a magnet. You know, as soon as you start searching physical symptoms of anxiety or what creates anxiety, all of a sudden you'll be flooded with loads of doom stuff about how bad it is. People's, saying, well, I've had it for 25 years or whatever it is, it's this bad and that bad. And so the algorithm picks that stuff up, and it's never the positive stuff because it's probably something negative that you put into the algorithm. And so, oh
Mhm.
yeah, we're gonna filter in everything that's awful and catastrophic. And so you have to be really careful about what you put in there because you know there's an awful lot of stuff on the internet, and it's about what you allow in, just in terms of the perceptual filter. It's the same with digital media. It's what you're prepared to allow in. So
Mhm.
take control of that. Notice what things the algorithm is sending you. If it's doom case studies, have a look for where the reality is. Have a look for something that's less about doom and clicks on doom stories, and more about reality or positive outcomes. That's how to sort of filter it, because it has a massive impact, because of course your brain is out there when you've got an anxious brain looking for evidence. It wants to validate its anxious tilt on the world. So it'll take in everything that's negative and chuck out everything that's positive or hopeful. So,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that, um, and the research backs it up. It's one of the things that's hugely increased the levels of anxiety because of how much digital media we consume.
Yeah, even just on a sheer brain computing power level too. I've spent far less time on social media. I've never used it personally, but even just for work, like I've distilled it down to a couple of platforms that I use now. And I listen to my wife more. I am less scatterbrained around the house. I forget less things. It's helped me on that level because I've got a bit more left in the battery.
Yeah. I mean, it is hugely draining. I think we've all sat down and looked for something and then become totally absorbed in scrolling. And it's an hour later and you've not done anything. And it's this removal from reality, from the real world. Like you say, you're talking to your wife more. You're engaging more in your reality, in your world. You're communicating more because, of course, the thing with social media is that it kids you into thinking that you're communicating with real people that you could connect with in the real world. But I don't know if you've ever actually seen somebody that you've chatted to on social media. A lot of people are worried about talking to them in real life. Would you actually go up to someone you see in a coffee shop queue and go, "Oh, hi, I'll follow you on social media"? It's weird, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
not real communication, and that's one of the problems with social media. And I know there's loads of research that I think is government funded, that's coming through with that and the impact on mental health, because of course everybody blames COVID for the teenage anxiety epidemic and the disruption in sort of social norms for them. But actually, there's more stuff that's at play because they were born into a digital age. I still remember the days before mobile phones and the internet. It's different. There's like a safety net there, but youngsters are coming through, and this is their world. This is what they know how to do, and it has such an impact on things like anxiety rates.
It really does. It's been a Wild West era, and it's very encouraging to start to see some serious books coming out about that now that are showing just how damning the data is on that, and but also movements are rising out of that. I'm part of a local several WhatsApp groups actually around my kids at school, and about sort of lobbying the school to getting them involved in the conversation to hopefully ban smartphones or at least have them in lockers for the rest of the day, and to encourage parents not to give them to the kids until they're well into their teens and hopefully past puberty. It's there's a lot
Yeah.
of research to back that up.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you hit on something really vital there, which is human connection. We're very social creatures, and that's regardless of whether you're introvert, extrovert, wherever you sit on that spectrum. We all need connection with the right people in our lives and positive, nourishing relationships. Um, loneliness is a real thing, and that has been driven somewhat by digital communications. Because, like you said, it gives us this very vacuous version of a human fundamental and doesn't deliver on it, which brings on other feelings of guilt and disconnect and self-doubt and all sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. You always work with what I think I know research is sort of built on it. It's now the five pillars, but the three pillars is always about engagement with other people, achievement in your world, and doing things that you enjoy, fun. And engagement's such a key one. And like you say, it doesn't matter whether you would describe yourself as a social person. It doesn't matter where you are in that world. Engagement is essential for us as human beings. We're sort of we like other people. We need that engagement, and it can be something as simple as a hello and a quick chat with someone. If you've just gone into a shop to buy something, that counts as engagement. But we're so close to cutting all of that out of our world, and it's what we call the three pillars of happiness. And if somebody comes in, with low mood, straight away without even thinking it, I'm already asking the questions about how much have they got in each of those boxes. Where is this stuff missing? Because I know that though that's the low hanging fruit, those are the easy wins for me.
Yeah,
If they cut out engagement and with social media and how that is, it's so easy to do that. And
yes.
it's not the same. Messaging people, it's not too bad. The research tells us about communicate, in this way through screens and where you're actually seeing someone as if they're actually in the room with you. But so many, particularly the younger generation, you know, with kids, they'll text you when they're in the next room. It's crazy, and that's what we're cutting out of the world, and it's having such a big impact on mental health.
I'm a big advocate of it, and I'm as guilty as the next person for going periods without socializing at times. It's all too easy just to sit on the couch and watch Netflix if you're feeling tired in the evening. But every time that I push myself to go and, whether it's meet a friend for a drink, go for a walk, dog walk, whatever it might be, I thank myself every time I come back and go, why did you leave that so long? I feel so much better now having just talked about things. And it doesn't even have to be the issue or the thing that's in your head. It's just sitting in a room with a person and feeling that sense of belonging that can be really, can change your mood completely.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge difference to people, and it doesn't even have to be that sort of one-to-one conversation. If people are feeling quite isolated, you know, one of my prescriptive things is dog walking. If you're a dog lover, get a dog. There's nothing more sociable than taking the dog for a walk. It's outside and a bit of Dr. Green. It's so good for your mental health. Dog walking is brilliant because if you're, you know, if you're not very comfortable in social scenarios or worry about talking to people, you talk about other people's dogs. I don't know whether you've got a dog, but I know all the dogs' names. Don't know the owners' names, but I'll still have a
Yeah.
chat with them.
Yeah. It's always the
you
way.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, I can tell you what all the dogs called, and that's the great thing about dogs and dog walking for mental health.
Yeah.
You don't have to show up as you. You're just going for a dog walk, but it's a very sociable thing to do. It's about that engagement, and it's so positive for mental health.
Yeah, it really is. And as I mentioned, like with having a boy and a girl, young kids, I am already fostering interests that I know will lead them to tribes, to communities, whether that's sport, whether they're both quite different in the way they're wired, which is lovely. I get to compare and contrast. But, like my little, well, they're both really into Pokemon at the minute, but my little lad is very much, he's that way inclined with the nerdery of it all. And he loves the stats on the cards and stuff. And, I've got my eye on this little gaming shop that's opened up in town where all the nerds hang out and play the card games together. And, so I just want to kind of equip them with something that is quite normalized in their world, which is belonging to many different subsets and groups, so that it's something they will do for joy and it will be a part of their world, because I just know how good that is for mental health.
Yeah, huge. And like you say, you're nurturing their specific draws in like a modern way, whatever that is. And it is about that belonging, and that's one of the things about engaging with people. It's a way of feeling that you belong. It's
Hmm.
not about finding friends and finding new people and, spending time with them. It's engagement. It can be on a really, really small level, but it's about feeling part of something, even if it's just being part of a group of dog owners or, whatever that is, living in a village or living in a particular part of town, whatever that looks like for people.
Yeah.
Yes, it's important.
Well, I think I've covered, most things I wanted to chat to you about here, Wendy. And I could sort of sit here and
Oh,
start asking you for a load of tips, but I'm going to point people towards your podcast because it's been a really big help for me. They're relatively short episodes. They're full of actionable tips and valuable insights from someone such as yourself. So, first of all, thank you for doing it. But I would also encourage my listeners to listen to it. Could you tell us a little bit about the show and where people can find it?
it's on all wherever you get your podcasts from. It's on all of the platforms, and it's under my name, Wendy Dignan, and it's called Overcoming Anxiety. And I jump on there and talk about. Sometimes I'll answer questions that I've had, but usually it's about solutions. I'm very solutions focused because I think a lot of people can give you lots of information about anxiety, but actually, what people really want to know is how to overcome it.
Mhm.
And so that's what the show is all about.
Brilliant. Well, I love it. Thank you so much for this. I think it's going to be a big help
Pleasure.
to my listeners. Yeah. And if people want to contact you directly for your practice, where would they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a look on my website, so I've got two websites. We've got wendydignan.co.uk, and that's the private practice website, but you can contact me through there, or on the Fearless Female one, which is where we talk about anxiety and sell and do lots of things that help people overcome anxiety. So either one. And same thing, social media. Just message me. If you've got any questions, I'm always happy to answer questions. Whatever the question is, ask me. I will answer you. Whatever I can do to help people overcome anxiety, I will do. So just get in touch.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This has been great. And cheers, Wendy.
Good. Pleasure. Lovely to meet you. I've got some notes that I'm going to go away and research off you and some little takeaways. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to Wendy Dignan for taking the time out of her busy schedule as one of the UK's leading psychologists specialising in anxiety. You can check out her work at fearlessfemale.co.uk or wendydignan.co.uk now, easy to connect with. And I do strongly recommend checking out her podcasts, Overcoming Anxiety. It's been a wonderful help to me clue myself up about specific aspects of the way my thoughts work, about how we can respond to the inevitability of anxiety, because we all feel it. It's a biological alarm system. It is not a condition. It is something we have that just gets fired up for the wrong reasons and perpetuated beyond all belief because of the noise of this world, because of all the things that we have going on and our inability to deal with it. But with understanding, with people like Wendy, we can take much better control of that than we allow ourselves to believe. So I hope this has been some use for you guys. It is part of an ongoing toolkit of mental health specific episodes. When I've got enough in the bag, I don't know how many that will be. I'm talking to a lot of interesting people at the moment about new episodes. I will edit together a one-off episode bringing together highlights from each of these conversations so that there is a very bite-sized, something you can carry around on your phone in your pocket and turn to in times of need. Because I want to help you guys, because mental health has been something at the top of my agenda since about, always as a human, but something professionally since 2013 when I learned the savage statistics about particularly male suicide, but also just the mental health crisis in general for anyone. Heartbreaking. And I've had my own troubles the last few years. Nothing too serious, just kind of underlying anxiety and times of stress and overwhelm with doing too much and feeling the weight of the world, whether it's the wars that are going on out there, the climate crisis, and all the big issues. And that's the reason that in my own coaching practice, I cover specifically insurmountables, as we mentioned on the show there with the chat with Wendy. Insurmountables being the heavy stuff we don't have any direct control over, that troubles us and takes away from our optimism and our sense of flow and ultimately our creativity, because creativity in its sustainable form relies on a healthy, firing, optimistic mind so that we see the beauty and the opportunities in the world. And it's not always possible. And there is value in adversity, but not sustainably. If you're constantly walking around anxious, it's exhausting. Like we talked about there, it feels like you're running a marathon in your mind, and no one can function over a long period of time optimally in that way. So that's why I do these episodes. I want to help everyone. It's a key cause. The world is turbulent. It always has been. Don't buy into the sense that everything's fucked and that's the way the world is at the moment. It's probably felt like this to every single generation of humans in some way, shape or form. It's just that we are hyper aware of it because of 24/7 news cycles. It's rammed down our throats. We as individuals have to learn to curate that, learn when it's beneficial for us to access the news, and in other times, focus on the beneficial stuff. Grateful flow, using tools where we can control our thoughts to a greater degree and make them work for us. So I hope that has helped. Get in touch. I'd love to have a little natter with you about it, ben@bentalon.com. If you want to work one-to-one through that coaching, I am wide open. I've got space for new clients moving forwards. I've got room for pit stops. That's my one-to-one intensive session that will elevate your creativity and your conscious direction moving forward. Help get you aligned based on your lived experience, your story, your desires, your frustrations, and all of the things. We work together to work through all of the foundational elements of your creativity, and then I will prescribe you recommendations and exercises and give you actionable advice to take you to the next level. That sounds good. Get in touch through the website, thecreativecondition.com/coach. I have long-term clients. If the pit stop goes well as a kickoff, then we work together long-term. We design 6-month, 3-month, 1-year programs to really guide you along in that process. Whatever it may be, writing a book, getting a new portfolio together, looking for a shift in careers, just getting your optimism back. There's much we can do. Check out the testimonials on that page and get in touch. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com. Please do consider helping the Ukrainian Institute. You can see the work they're doing to support the Ukrainian creative community during this horrific time of war at ui.org.ua. Big thank you once again to today's guest, Wendy Dignan. Check her out, wendydignan.co.uk, fearlessfemale.co.uk. Have a great week, guys. Diary up next. Have a good one.